Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sabbath School class. And so we begin, or I should say, we continue where we left off. That would be in Lesson 2, the July 7th to the December, I'm sorry, not July 7th, but July to December 1888, picking up in question number 14. What then is represented by a power coming up out of the sea? And it says here in question number 14 to see the notes. So let's go down and read the notes. Question 14 says, his vision of the 7th chapter, Daniel says, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea. These four great beasts represented the four great kingdoms of Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome, of which, by the way, everybody agrees on in the Christian community, or just about everybody. They get off base when it comes to the 10 part, 10 toes of the statue, 10 horns of the dreadful beast. But continuing on in the note now, each of these arose by overthrowing the one that had gone before it. And as a symbolic sea represents people, multitudes, nations, and tongues, it is easy to understand how these great powers came up from the sea. It is also plain that a power symbolized as coming up out of the earth would arise from a condition of things the opposite of that represented as the sea. That is, from a place where before it there had not been peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So that's basically what the notes trying to bring out the fact that the earth represents an unpopulated place on earth. And so as the first beast is going down, and the second beast is coming up, we're supposed to look around in that time frame then for for an unpopulated area, not many languages spoken, not many people coming up to form a nation eventually. So question number 15, what by a power coming out of the earth? And we already described that. That's unpopulated. So now we're on to question number 16 already. In 1798, how much of Europe, Asia, and Africa was occupied by peoples, multitudes, and established and organized nations? Well, the answer that they give you is all the known parts of them. And that's pretty much true. In fact, excluding dialects, there are lots of different backgrounds of nationalities, different types of peoples, and definitely congested areas, multitudes of people, and, well, definitely organized nations. And that's probably what caused all the infighting to begin with anyways. But moving on to question number 17. How long had it been so? And the answer they give you is for ages, which is basically to say it's been that way for a long time, just as prophesied. Question number 18. Therefore, as the symbols which are directly connected with the beast embrace the principal parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa, as all the rest of the known parts of the eastern continent had been for ages, occupied by established nations, and as the other beast was to arise where this had not been so, where must this other beast arise? And that is basically in the western continent. If the focus is on Europe, and when they say Asia, they're not talking necessarily all the way to Japan, but they include basically the Middle East as Asia, and the northern part of Africa, a new nation that would be like a cousin to those areas would none other be in the Western Hemisphere. Now, in my personal Bible studies with other people, there has been one person that raised a comment that said, oh, Australia was also becoming a nation around the time of the United States. Are we sure it's not Australia that fulfills this? And the answer is it cannot be, because unlike Australia, we actually broke away and was recognized as a separate nation. They may have a different nation, but they're still under England's control. So question number 19 then. Did the dominion of the first beast or any of the 10 kingdoms extend to any part of the Western continent in 1798? It did. Spain, France, Portugal, Britain, then owned all except the possessions of what had been the 13 British colonies, but which then formed the United States of America. So it's interesting that, yeah, all the different nations that they mention there, Spain, France, Portugal, and Britain, all had some type of possession or territory, what would become the United States of America, and so there was definitely an interest there. Question number 20. What position then did the government of the United States occupy in 1798? I give you again the answer. It was the only independent nation then on earth which had arisen where there had not formerly been for ages peoples, multitudes, and established nations. So even though they're trying to tell you that, yeah, there was 4 different languages basically spoken in the United States, and distinct languages, and they represented 4 different nations, this does not discredit the fact that the United States eventually becomes the independent nation that it needed to be. So what they were trying to do was establish that prior to those 4 nations trying to set up territories, prior to all of that, it was basically unpopulated. What they did with the Native Americans is shameful, but basically this is fulfilling prophecy in which and should not be discredited just because there was 4 different nations from Europe trying to establish territorial rights over here in what would become the United States. And besides that, eventually we did not become 4 separate nations. We became one nation around the time of the fall of the first beast. And so let's not discredit that just because France had a territory in which something called the Louisiana Purchase took it away from the French. So eventually the 13 colonies extended beyond and took over the entire nation, and that's where we are today. And so yes, it's a fulfillment of prophecy. Let's take a look at question number 20. What position then did the government of the United States occupy in 1798? It was the only independent nation then on earth which had arisen where there had not formerly been for ages peoples, multitudes, and established nations. And that's just a review of where we were after I just interjected there. So now verse 21. How about question number 21? What then is the inevitable conclusion? And the answer, that the United States government is the power signified in the prophecy of Revelation 13:11 to 17. And so that is the logical conclusion. You look all over the entire world, as I mentioned, somebody tried to point out Australia, but it does not fulfill prophecy. And besides that, the description of the beast being formed a lamb-like with two horns, and then he eventually speaks as a dragon. That further description does not fit any other category, and literally taken, by the way. It's not that it had an appearance of a lamb. Just the horns look like a lamb. So don't think of this being like the dreadful beast that has 10 horns and another horn comes up. These are lamb-like horns, but the face of it is very dragon-like. And if you put the two together and try to form an animal that has tiny little horns, but it's mean and vicious, it describes nothing different than a national symbol in which Obama himself has now made it official that it does represent the United States, and that's the buffalo. Question number 22. What is to be said to the people of this government? And what we're looking at is verse 14. So let's take a look there. Revelation, so getting into our Bibles, Revelation 13, verse 14. And the Bible says, "And deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of these miracles, those miracles, which he had power to do in the sight of the beast," focusing on the last part here, "saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by the sword and did live." Again, the question is, what is to be said to the people of this government? That we would actually, according to the last part there, help bring back the beast that had the deadly wound and now lives. And none other country has as friendly and most active, and even though Trump and the Pope go head to head, there is none that's been more active in our history than the United States and the papacy together. That was definitely evident under Ronald Reagan and John Paul II. And that's what sets up, by the way, the seventh head representing the United States, ready for the eighth one to take its place, which, according to Revelation, says that it's one of the previous seven, and the one basically that had the wound and then is not, and now is, that happens to be the eighth one, and that's referring to the papacy. So that means we, as the United States, are going to make every effort in bolstering up this power. And it's becoming more and more evident that we're doing just that, and it does not necessarily have to come out of the White House. Just look at the CNN documentary that's 6 episodes long, discussing the Antichrist, or I shouldn't say it that way, it's the Pope. They don't call it the Antichrist, they actually try to put the Pope in favorable light. And now we have a movie coming out. Yes, it's German sourced, but nonetheless, we definitely have encouraged all of this to move along quite rapidly here. And we are definitely on very friendly terms with the papacy. And Trump himself is committed to push the agenda along, even though he disagrees with the whole climate change. But nonetheless, as far as the deeper meaning, the morals, he wants morals back in the United States. And if that means the restoration all the way back to Sunday worship, he'll do it. All right, so now let's move on to question number 23. When they shall have made an image to the beast, what will he do? And that's verses 11 and 15. Now remember, when we talk about an image, it's not a literal image. Many people say, yeah, look back there in Daniel chapter 3, it was a literal image. Yes, those things are done literally to show us the spirituality of things. An image is any likeness thereof. And when we change our government to become the image of the papacy, that's when church and state join together enforcing policy. And we're pretty much all set up for that to happen, especially under this administration. Not to say that God can't hold his hand and wait for another administration, but we definitely have the evangelicals that are in charge, telling what, influencing Trump's decisions, and definitely having, well, with that type of influence, we're setting up the image. Like I said, everything's in place. It's just we need one more catalyst. Does it help with the shooting in Florida? That's a catalyst, but not the catalyst. What the catalyst will be that gets the majority on board to say, yeah, we want separation of church and state, but hey, under this crisis, anything goes. For the nation to actually be more supportive than they are, because currently, every time Trump sneezes, he gets bad publicity left and right, and it looks like he's getting nothing done, but underneath, he really is. And as far as Bible prophecy is concerned, he's really aligning us very, very rapidly in the restoration of morality through, basically, forced Christianity. So then, let's read verses 11 and 15. Revelation 13:11, the Bible says, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon." And verse 15, "And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed." It's probably a good point to tell you, by the way, if class, as you are continuing on here, do feel free to pause any moment. Instead of giving you a 10-minute buffer, I'll give you 5, since you kind of didn't need much last time. So we'll give you a 5-minute buffer to be pausing, have a little bit of discussion. And you might want to discuss this. When they shall have made an image to the beast, what will they do? And what's interesting is that in verse 15, it said he had power to give life unto the image of the beast. Where does that power come from? It's called legislation. So somewhere along the lines, be it the current administration, so Trump, is it executive orders? Or is it, as Ellen White predicts as well, that if officials really want to get reelected, we're tired of the immorality in this country, and they will cater to the moral upright, even though they themselves disagree, they will enact certain laws to keep their position. And we see it. That's how Trump got into office, by having a close relationship with the evangelicals. And now the question is it going to be an act of Congress or an executive order? Executive orders were intended to be just for the government, basically, or in specific things that are outlined in the Constitution that gives Trump, the presidency that is, the ability to act quickly. Can you imagine being under attack, for instance, and saying, well, let's schedule a meeting so that we can discuss our position on this, and Congress trying to draft something? It takes months for that to happen when you need 24 hours or less. So there are certain things built into the Constitution, and that it's been voted to the presidency to act quickly upon. But under the Obama administration, I'm not so sure, I'm not eliminating the Bush administration, but under the Obama administration, he went beyond the federal government guidelines. In other words, if he wants to declare no discrimination for homosexuality, as he did, that's only good for the federal government. He cannot make businesses comply with that, yet that's exactly what happened without an act of Congress. And Congress dropped the responsibility of challenging it. And I can understand why, because they did challenge a few things only to have the liberal judges in place to uphold the Obama's position. For instance, Obama is not allowed to create an extra tax without an act of Congress, and yet when challenged, sort of was right, but by the time it went through the process, Obama changed the name from a tax to a penalty, and I think there's another word that was used in there to lighten what was going on. Therefore, the tax was allowed. It's an outright flat lie is what happened, and it got through. And that opposite is being exposed now, in which Trump is trying to do executive orders, which he has permission to do, and yet the liberal judges are preventing, blocking it. And so it's going to be interesting to see what God allows here to fulfill Revelation 13:15, and that is that he had power to be able to give a church and state unification here in the United States. Somehow, this country is going to do this. It's predicted here in the Bible. So that's just the beginning there. And so once they have made an image, what will they do? So once it successfully gets through the court system and allowed, and it can happen real quickly like 9/11 did, you see, God allows certain things to happen to give us a preview of what's going on, so that we're not caught off guard or don't think things could happen. If 9/11 events and the legislation that was passed immediately after 9/11 can happen that quickly within a week, even a month, this whole notion of, oh, we'll never have church and state, all it takes is one good crisis or a simultaneous number of small crises all adding up to a big crisis, and we're there. We're all set. So now once they have this image, he's going to then turn around and make it, as speaking as a dragon, he's going to cause that as many as would not worship the image. And remember, worship is not, oh, gotta bow down, gotta say my prayers to it. Worship is obedience, compliance with it. That's a form of worship, and that's a big form of worship that's shown throughout the Bible in many cases. God had appealed to Israel a number of times. Worship me and keep my commandments. You see the commandments being connected there. As part of worship, as opposed through all the Christians that go to church out of the obligation of it. Oh, gotta go, my parents would be upset with me. This is what we're supposed to do as Christians. Is the sermon over yet? Let me out of here. Instead of it from the heart. Who keeps track of time when the sermon is so interesting? That's what we're talking about here, is that it's simply obedience going on here. And so if you do not go along with this solution to whatever crisis is coming, that so much so you would end up, well, being threatened to be killed. And remember, up until the first plague pours out, killing will happen. And many people will be martyred, but just like in the earlier days in the church, that is what is going to plant the real seeds of Christianity. This whole mamby-pamby, sappy Christianity, having a good time type Christianity, all of that is going to change. And only the true Christians are going to really sign up to be martyrs. I mean, who else would say, let's see, if I keep the 10 Commandments and not go along with the commandments of the government, I could be killed? Yeah, sign me up. No, only those that see that this is fulfillment of prophecy and that to not align with God is a sure ticket to hell, those are the ones that are going to be signing up. And that's what, by the way, helps clean out the church, because many people have signed up not thinking that their life might be at stake. All right, so that takes care of question number 23. And we already read the note, so therefore we're ready for the Ellen White notes that have been compiled to follow along here. So our first quote comes from the Book of Education, page 191. The Book of Revelation, in connection with the Book of Daniel, especially demands the study. Let every God-fearing teacher consider how most clearly to comprehend and to present the gospel that our Savior came in person to make known to his servants John, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him to show unto his servants things that which must shortly come to pass. Revelation 1:1 was quoted there. None should become discouraged in the study of Revelation because of its apparently mystical symbols. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not. James 1:5. Now, that does not mean you're instantly going to understand the book of Revelation. I've already read some obscure passages in the Bible and spent some significant time trying to figure it out, and it's like, well, I've done the best I can, only to find out that as I continued on reading other material and other chapters of the Bible, just something unlocking, and it's like, wow, this has been in the back of my mind for 7 months. I just picked that randomly. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean that as soon as you pray, you would be enlightened to know it. So don't force it. At the same time, don't say, I'll never understand that. It's too obscure. If God wanted me to know this, why did he make it so symbolic? And I like the reference that somebody else made once on this subject. Symbolism transcends time. So instead of describing the Antichrist as these uniformed people sitting over in Rome and wearing fish-like hats and going to slaughter the saints and all kinds of more specific things that are not necessarily aware for that time frame. What if he decided that, and to slay the saints, we're going to use machine guns. What's a machine gun? So instead, what we have here is other symbolism that will, again, transcend time. All right, so don't give up because of the symbolism, but also realize that not everything's going to be clear on one quick passage through. After reading the Bible a number of times, there are certain verses that automatically just start coming out of the scriptures as you try to dissect Daniel and Revelation. All right, next paragraph comes from Great Controversy, page 578. The influence of Rome in the countries that once acknowledged her dominion is still far from being destroyed, and prophecy foretells a restoration of the power. I saw one of the heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. The infliction of the deadly wound points to the downfall of the papacy in 1798. After this, says the prophet, his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Paul states plainly that the man of sin will continue unto the second advent. 2 Thessalonians 2:3-8. To the very close of time, he will carry forward to the work of deception, and the Revelator declares also, referring to the papacy, all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, again that obedience thing, whose names are not written in the book of life, and that's Revelation 13:8. In both the old and the new world, the papacy will receive homage in the honor and paid to the Sunday institution that rests solely upon the authority of the Roman Church. And that's the sad thing, is that Sunday is nowhere found outside of the papacy. Okay, next section comes from the Great Controversy, the 88 version, and that will take us, well, quite a few paragraphs. It finishes it off. It starts on page 439 and continues on to 443. Not sure if we'll get through all of it, but we'll see what we can do. At this point, another symbol is introduced, says the prophet. I beheld another beast came up out of the earth and had two horns like a lamb. Both the appearance of the beast and the manner of its rise indicate that the nation which it represents is unlike those presented under the preceding symbols. The great kingdoms that have ruled the world were presented to the prophet Daniel as beasts of prey rising when the four winds of the heavens strove upon the great sea. In Revelation 17, an angel explained that the waters represent peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Winds are a symbol of strife. The four winds of heaven striving upon the great sea represent the terrible scenes of the conquest and revolution by which the kingdoms have attained power. But the beast with the lamb-like horns was seen coming up out of the earth. Instead of overthrowing other powers to establish itself, the nation thus represented must arise in territory previously unoccupied and grow up gradually and peacefully. It could not then arise among the crowded and struggling nationalities of the old world. That turbulent sea of the people and multitudes and nations and tongues, it must be sought in the western continent. What nation of the New World was in 1798 rising into power, giving promise of strength and greatness and attracting the attention of the world? The application of the symbol admits of no question. One nation and only one meets the specifications of the prophecy. It points unmistakably to the United States of America. Again and again, the thought, almost the exact words of the sacred writer have been unconsciously employed by the orator and the historian in describing the rise and growth of this nation. The beast was seen coming up out of the earth, and according to the translators, the word here rendered coming up literally signifies to grow or spring up as a plant. And as we have seen, the nation must arise in a territory previously unoccupied. A prominent writer describing the rise of the United States speaks of the mystery of the coming forth from vacancy, and says, like silent seed we grew into empire. That's from Towson in the New World compared to the Old, page 462. A European journal in 1850 spoke of the United States as a wonderful empire which was emerging, and amid the silence of the earth daily adding to its power and pride. The Dublin nation. Edward Everett, in an oration on the Pilgrim founders of the nation, said, "Did they look for a retired spot in a fence from obscurity, safe in its remoteness from the haunts of despots, where the little church of Leyden might enjoy freedom of conscience? Behold, the mighty regions over which in peaceful conquest they have borne the banners of the cross." And my apologies, Sam, for mispronouncing any of those words. Continuing on now. "And he had the horns like a lamb." The lamb-like horn indicates youth, innocence, and gentleness, fitly representing the character of the United States when presented to the prophet as coming up in 1798. The Christian exiles who first fled to America sought an asylum from royal oppression, priestly intolerance, and they determined to establish a government upon the broad foundation of civil and religious liberty. There's your Protestantism and republicanism. There you go. That's what they're typically referred to as. So civil and religious liberty are those two horns. The Declaration of Independence sets forth the great truth that all men are created equal and endowed with the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government, providing that representatives, republicanism, elected by the popular vote shall enact and administer the laws. Freedom of religious faith was also granted, every man being permitted to worship God according to the dictates of his conscience. Republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the nation. These principles are the secret of its power and prosperity. The oppressed and downtrodden throughout Christendom have turned to the land with interest and hope. Millions have sought its shores, and the United States has risen to a place among the powerful nations of the earth. And it is very interesting that of all the nations that people want to criticize, it's this nation that everybody flocks to. But the beast with the lamb-like horns spake as a dragon, and he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. The lamb-like horns and dragon voice of the symbol, pointing to a striking contradiction between the professions and the practice of the nation, thus represented. The speaking of the nation is the action of its legislative and judicial authorities. By such action, it will give the lie to those liberal and peaceful principles which it has put forth as the foundation of its policy. The prediction that it will speak as a dragon and exercise all power of the first beast plainly foretells the development of the spirit of intolerance. Are we sensing that in the United States today? And persecution that was manifested by the nations represented by the dragon and the leopard-like beast. And the statement that the beast with two horns causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast indicates that the authority of this nation is to be exercised in enforcing some observation which shall be an act of homage to the papacy. And the greatest act, of course, Sunday. Continuing on, such action would be directly contrary to the principles of the government, to the genius of its free institution, to the direct and solemn avowals of the Declaration of Independence, and to the Constitution. The founders of the nation wisely sought to guard against the employment of secular power on the part of the church, with its inevitable result, intolerance and persecution. The Constitution provides that Congress shall make no law representing an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, and that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office of public trust under the United States. Only in flagrant violation of these safeguards to the nation's liberty can any religious observance be enforced by the civil authority. But the inconsistency of such action is no greater than is represented in the symbol. It is the beast with the lamb-like horns in profession pure, gentle, and harmless, that speaks as a dragon. Saying to them that dwell on the earth, they should make an image to the beast. Here is clearly presented a form of government in which the legislative power rests with the people, a most striking evidence that the United States is the nation denoted in the prophecy. And so, as you see here, there's a lot to go on here, but it all can be done rapidly. It is predicted that every part of our Constitution will be repudiated. It is a movement of the people to demand the change to a more moral environment. And when one says more moral, that's usually a look back to when it used to be moral and want those days back, such as when Sundays were a day of rest, and basically we're pointing to the 1950s or so, which is echoed by Trump quite often and hated by many on the left that want to keep progressing forward, which is basically progress in morality, and this country's had enough. And so all of it is part of prophecy. We have swung the pendulum so far to the left that we're going to have a snapshot back to the right, and look out for the true Christians. We're going to be under attack. All right, then. So you only had 3 minutes of discussion. So let's close here with prayer and be on with our next service. Our Father, we thank you so very much for this opportunity to have spent in thy word. We pray now that you will prepare us for the next message, and may you receive the glory, and may we receive of thy Spirit to live according to your word. And we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.